Hello everyone, I'm Vaughn, this is Andrew over here. We're talking to you today about a project that was, the genesis of which was in 2019. I was driving up to Gisborne to see Andrew and he'd just concluded the powdery mildew case study, and I thought we could do something similar with mealybugs. So from that casual meeting, it morphed into this project which commenced in 2020. And the title of it, Improving the Outcomes of Mealybug Insecticide Use in Vineyards. These are our two protagonists in the vineyard. They are the two mealybug species which we find around the country in our vineyards, the long-tailed mealybug and the citrophilus mealybug. They are both responsible for acquiring and transmitting leaf roll virus through the vineyards, but perhaps down here the more noticeable consequence is as a result of their feeding and the production of honeydew, a waste byproduct, which when disposed of and landing on the leaves or in the bunches gives rise to the black sooty mould, which can result in wine taint and can result in crop rejection at harvest. So managing these guys is really, really important. And today's presentation is around an insecticide focus, but of course there are biocontrol, which we're happy to take any questions on. So the focus of today's study, the primary objective was around improving the understanding and the use of insecticides, targeting mealybugs on grapevines, with a view to giving better management outcomes. That's a copy there of Year 3 report that was written in 2022. Every year we wrote an annual report to BRI and delivered it to them. In 2020, we actually had a couple of additional recommendations, one of which was really around trying to identify, I guess, some contradictory messages, some potentially problematic messages that we might find around what someone like Andrew and I might say, or BRI might say, relative to what the old buprofizin labels, depending on the product, might say. The outcome of that piece of work was that we recommended to BRI that they should be engaging with the merchants, who of course are going to be sticking very closely to what the label says, bearing in mind that these labels, particularly in the case of the buprofizin products, were written decades ago, 30 plus years ago. Our understanding of mealybugs, their biology, their ecology in vineyards has grown a lot in that time. So where, for example, it says to apply at bud break or the first sign of bud movement, and someone like me or Andrew or BRI in a fact sheet, which I'll show in a second, might say to apply at around EL12, for example, there's potential for that confusion. And where you've got confusion, you've got potential for frustration among the grower community hearing contradictory messages. So my request to BRI is engage with those merchants, identify where the differences might lie, and try and synchronise and standardise those messages as much as you possibly can. This study it had 11 commercial vineyards, 3 in Gisborne, 2 in Hawke's Bay and 6 in Marlborough. All of them were conventionally managed, so all of them could apply insecticides targeting mealybugs. Ultimately though, all of the decisions that were made around the insecticide program were at the discretion of the growers themselves. We offered advice on things like timing and sprayer maintenance, but ultimately the call was theirs as to whether they did 1, 2 or 3 applications and when they did it. The methods here, right at the start of this, once we'd identified our 11 commercial sites, we met with each of these individual participants kind of individually and annually thereafter to talk with them about their block, what they'd seen in terms of mealybug in the recent history, but also more historically. We discussed their spray programs, the target, the vines, the vine planting density, We looked at we reviewed the spray setup, speed they were travelling down the rows, nozzle alignment, sprayer maintenance. All of those aspects were up for discussion. We talked about we reviewed the spray diaries. We went back as far as 2018 for all of the blocks, and for a couple of them we actually went back a few years earlier. So for at least 5 vintages, we kind of got a sense of what their spray program looked like historically, and you know, when we started this in 2020, how did it change? We were particularly interested in the products that they'd used, the chemical rates they'd used to ensure there was you know, no underdosing in particular, the water volumes relative to the size of the vine canopy at the time of spraying, and of course we wanted to determine the point of first runoff at the time of application, and the potential for that under and overdosing, which are so important. To get an idea of what was happening with each of these spray programs and what it was doing in terms of mealybug management over time, for each of these 3 years, immediately pre-harvest, we'd go into all of these study blocks and we'd collect 200 leaves widely from each of the study areas, and we would take them back to the laboratory and they'd be individually assessed for mealybugs. We would count every life stage that we found on every leaf, and the goal was, of course, to get an idea of whether or not those mealybug populations were increasing, decreasing, or remaining relatively stagnant, and that actually informed a lot of conversation. We defined low infestations as anything less than 20 mealybugs found on per 100 vine leaves inspected. High infestations were 51 or more mealybugs per 100 leaves, and the moderate infestations were intermediate between those two. Serendipity kicked in partway through, nothing to do with Andrew or I. In 2020, 2021, you might recall there was an advisory came out from SWINS, indicating that from, I think, the time of the first pruning wound in 2021, no more organophosphates, tocopherol, lawsban, for example, were to be applied to grapevines. This was an important, it was serendipity, but it was a really important piece of information, as you'll see very shortly. And I know there might be a few people out there who lament the loss of those products. I think it's an inspired decision. I think it was a really good decision. And we'll show you some results shortly. Now, I'm going to give you sort of the end result kind of at the start of this presentation, and Andrew will talk a little more comprehensively around some of these individual sites. So on our vertical axis there, we've got a logarithmic scale, log 10, 10 times 10 is 100, 100 times 10 is 1,000. We've got wide variation in the number of mealybugs that were found. This is, I think, a good way of being able to present it. So that bottom red line there is less than or equal to 20 mealybugs found per 100 leaves. So that's our definition of good. And you can see with some of those blocks there, we either were consistently below that in years 2020, 21, 22, or in some cases we were consistently above it. And we'll be talking about an example, representative examples in each of those outcomes. So the industry have on their website this mealybug best practice kind of fact sheet. This came out in 2021. I need to look at it more closely to see whether or not there might be some changes required. But I think it's important to point out this just didn't pop up in isolation. There's years and years of work that's kind of gone into helping inform all of us around what we're seeing in our mealybugs. And I think it's really important to bear that in mind when we consider that for the buprofuscin products in particular, so that's your products, your applauds, your mortar, ovation, pelan, exalt, those kind of products, many of them have been out for 20 or more years. So the vine planting density has changed a lot over those times. So The old 3 metre wide rows are a rarity now relative to the 2.2, 2.4 metre wide rows, so planting density has increased. So as those changes have come in, we've had to change some of our recommendations for mealybug management in these blocks. Some of the labels haven't necessarily changed with the times. I'm going to pass it over to Andrew now, so I'll be back shortly.
Cheers, Vaughn. With best practice, the main things we're looking at here are the 4 items I've got up there. Chemical choice, what chemicals are we using, what chemicals are we trying not to use, the rates of those products for our canopies, not for a mysterious label canopy, as we'll get into. What application volume should we be making our applications at, and what are the best timings? With our chemical choice, when we started this program, as Vaughn mentioned, we did have the option of organophosphates. So when we started this program, one of the recommendations was don't use the organophosphates. Try not to use any broad spectrum chemistry that we know will have a detrimental effect on any beneficial insects. And I love the quote from Jim Walker. I've only got a part of it there, but this is something he used in quite a few crops, is make chemical choices, make decisions that allow any beneficial insects to flourish. With our chemical choice, we're mainly going to be talking about buprofezin, spirotetramat. A couple of reasons for that. Looking at spray diaries, they seem to be the 2 key products people are using, and it's what all of our study participants were using. They weren't using any of the other chemistry that's available. Product rates. Use and trust the Grape Link calculator. It's by no means perfect, but it's the best thing we've got. Looking at calculators for other crops, apples, citrus, vegetables, they wish they had something that was as good as a Grape Link calculator. It will get you in the ballpark of correct product rates and correct application volumes. All of the buprofezin products, all of the labels are compatible with the Grape Link calculator. They all express rates as either grams or mils per 100 litres sprayed to dilute, sprayed to the point of runoff. So it's very rare to see any buprofezin products being underdosed, which is good to see. Spirotetramat, on the other hand, the original product Movento, and all the 2 following spirotetramat products, their labels are not compatible with Grape Link. The rates on there are described as a hectare rate. On the label, it does not state what that hectare is, what the row spacing is, what the pruning type is, what the canopy density is. So chances are it may not be the same as your canopy. Bayer did move to correct this in 2018 by bringing out their Bayer Informs. Just a show of hands, who has seen the Bayer Informs fact sheet? 4 hands. Mark, I know you're here somewhere, you've got some work to do getting that information out. So yeah, as I said, the Bayer Informs does move to give you rates that will work in the Grape Link calculator, but even with that information coming out, it's, I would say, not fairly common. I'll correct myself there. It's very common to see Movento being underdosed, which is quite scary from an efficacy of your application point of view, but also from the possibility of developing resistance to that chemistry. Application volumes. Some of the buprofezin labels are stating you must apply it in 1,000 litres per hectare. As another thing Vaughn mentioned was that these labels are very old. Any new products that have come along, any new buprofezin products that have come along, tend to be a cut and paste of the original label. Applying 1,000 litres a hectare to the timings we're going to be talking about later, you're going to end up with excessive runoff. You're going to be putting most of your product on the ground. So we're certainly not recommending spraying at 1,000 litres per hectare. Error in my slide here, it shouldn't be both spirotetramat, it should be all. There are 3 spirotetramat products, so I apologise for that. All of them state 500 litres per hectare for an application volume, but again, they don't qualify what that hectare is. Chances are if your hectare is different from that hectare they mention on the label, you're going to need either less or more water to apply that chemistry. Our best practice recommendation is to spray at around about half the point of runoff. The Grape Link calculator will work that out for you. So when you describe your canopy into the calculator, it'll work out what the point of runoff, and then you just need to choose a volume that's around about half of that volume. The main reason why we're making that recommendation is generally the wetter the better. As we apply our chemistry in more water, spray coverage goes up and spray deposition goes up, but only up to that point of runoff. As we reach the point of runoff, we're putting about 10% of our chemicals on the ground, and any point over the point of runoff, that percentage hitting the ground just goes up. Buprofeasance contact action, so it has to come in contact with the mealybug at the time of spraying or very shortly afterwards. And mealybugs are great at hiding. They love those dense, dark parts of the canopy, remembering they've overwintered on the head of the vine, and they will set up camp on the first leaf or first two leaves that they actually come across. So they will be around the head of the vine, generally where we do struggle to get good spray coverage. Spirotetramat, on the other hand, is a systemic product. So you may think, well, if it's systemic, can't we apply it poorly and let the systemic nature of it take care of spreading it around? No, we can't. Most of the uptake of spirotetramat occurs when the product is wet. So we want that plant to be wet for as long as possible, and we want to get that spirotetramat on as much of the foliage on that vine as possible. So the wetter the better, as long as we don't get to or exceed the point of runoff. Timing. Don't get too upset if these timings aren't exactly spot on for your vineyard. These are sort of a general across the whole of the Marlborough region dates that commonly align with different phenological timings. If you're in a lucky position that you've got very low mealybug numbers and you think you can get away with just a single buprofeasant application, the recommended timing for that is as late as the label allows, and spray schedule at the moment says EL18 is the latest we can put it on, so immediate pre-flowering. Remembering we're targeting the first generation, and we think that most of that first generation is appearing from under the bark sort of late spring, early summer, so the later the better. If we're using a 2 buprofeasant program, you just slot that first buprofeasant in before that. So if you've got high mealybug numbers, you want some mealybug insecticide cover for a longer period on your vines, you'd go with a 2 buprofeasant program. If things are really starting to get out of hand, we definitely recommend what we're calling a 2+1 program. So 2 buprofeasants in that timing as late as the label allows, and a spirotetramat afterwards. I've got an asterisk on the spirotetramat there because different spirotetramat products do have different withholding periods. There are some spirotetramat products that have a pH of EL18 pre-flowering. So there is one or maybe 2 products there that we can't put on post-flowering. So whichever product you're using, please double check what the upcoming spray schedule says, because you don't want to go and put on the wrong product too late. If you're going for a nil residue, we know that if you put on spirotetramat post-flowering or through flowering, you will throw a residue. If your winery is saying no, we won't accept a spirotetramat residue, we know we can avoid residues if we put that spirotetramat on at that EL18, at that immediate pre-flowering timing. And if you're in that situation and you think you need a 2+1 program, you just simply shift everything forwards. Remembering we're trying to keep that cover on those vines for as long a period as possible while those crawlers are emerging out of the bark through the springtime. Some of the buprofeasant labels state you must put it on at the first sign of bud movement, which would put you into this early category. The problem we have there is you're running out of insecticide cover, around about late October. So when we think we've still got a lot of crawlers appearing through that later spring period up to December, you've already got no cover. You've used everything up, and any mealybug that emerge at that time won't be coming into contact with any meaningful dose of insecticide. Vaughn touched on the results before. What I'm going to have a look at here are a few of our case study blocks. I certainly won't go through all of them, but looking at the results versus the inputs. We're starting off with the one and only vineyard where we made things worse. Everything else did get better, so we'll start there. So we can see, we can see if we push the right button. This is before we had any input, 748 mealybug per 100 leaves. Second year we managed to get, halve it down to 359, and then it got out of control again. So what happened? So vintage 2020, they'd put on a buprofezin, spirotetramat, and a lawsban, and still managed to get that. Anywhere you see red up here means they didn't follow best practice. And the subscript describes what it was about that application that didn't meet best practice. So for this buprofezin here, they put it on too high volume. So they probably sprayed, I'm guessing, at that 1,000 litres a hectare, and the majority of their product ran onto the ground. Timing, we didn't get the timing right between those two buprofezins. The label state between 14 and 21 days. So in this case, there was 8 days between. I know it's hard to predict when things are going to happen. We have machinery issues, we have weather issues, but we need to be aiming for that 14 to 21 days to get the most out of this chemistry. But sometimes it just can't be helped. With the spirotetramat, this vineyard was on a 2.4 metre row. The product they chose states 750 mils per hectare. That was based on a 2.9 or so 3 metre row-spaced hectare. They're on a 2.4 metre hectare. They've got 20% more vine row per kilometre. They put on 80% of the spirotetramat they should have. They went at 750 mils per hectare, but because they had 20% extra row, canopy row, they should have put an extra 20% on. So they underdosed it, and they put it on in too low a volume of water. And then they went with a lawsban, so that gets a C for the chemical choice. Again, the lawsban label had I think it was 750 grams per hectare, so they put 750 grams on. They should have gone at 20% more than that. And they also mucked up the volume that they put it on at. So yeah, so we didn't do very well in that season, but we did have lots of inputs. Next year comes along, we get the two buprofezins correct, so correct rate, correct timing, correct application volumes. Didn't quite get the spirotetramat right, put it on in too low a volume, and we still went at 80% of the correct dose. But look what happened. So we did less, we did most of it better, and we got a pretty good result. The wheels fell off in 22. We only managed to get one of the buprofezins correct. We went at a high volume, so we ran a lot of product to the ground, and we didn't put the spirotetramat on that we suggested. So we went from 1 year, 4 inputs, down to 3 inputs, down to 2. We should have done 3, and that was the result. So not flash. 12C, if you ignore the numbers here, that looks like a great result. At least, we still end up with 199 mealybugs. So we virtually got 2 mealybugs on every leaf that we looked at. So that's still in the extremely high category. But look at the trend we got. And this was a vineyard that was addicted to organophosphates. Looking at spray diaries back to 2017, every season previous to this had at least 1, if not 2, organophosphates. And this was a grower that thought that they could not farm if they lost the organophosphates. But I think we proved that we could. So the second season, they didn't put on buprofezins like we recommended. They managed to put it on in a high volume, again running a lot to ground. Got the spirotetramat correct. So went from 5 interventions down to 2 and virtually half the number of mealybug. 22, managed to get the 2 buprofezins on, didn't get the spirotetramat on that we recommended, and we still got a huge decrease. Still work to do, but certainly trending in the right direction. I'd love to have seen what that number would have been if we had put that spirotetramat on. So just going back to that, I think that shows that even blocks that are really out of control, this is one of those blocks that you walk into and you just start scratching because you can see all the mealybug. You get to see the cryptolemus nymphs everywhere. You get to see sooty mould. It's quite spectacular. It doesn't look like that anymore down at these levels. This is the majority of the other blocks. So I won't spend as long on this one. Hopefully you've got the gist of what we're looking at here. You look at this lovely trend. So, getting down to some beautifully low numbers. So definitely into Vaughn's low category of mealybug per 100 leaves. Had a couple of blocks that had a bit of a jump up in the first year, but we certainly got those under control. I won't go through all of these in detail, but probably the main thing to take home is that, I just mentioned the karate up here. So they've got a beetle issue, so they have to be doing something about it, so they're using karate. What we would suggest if you are in that situation is treat as little of the block as you can. If you're only getting beetle damages on the outside rows, ends of rows, just spray those areas. If you can, leave the middle of the block as a reservoir for our beneficial insects to hang out in and not get zapped by the karate. So looking at that, the amount of red, there's quite a bit of red up top here. If I hadn't made those red, we've only got 2 applications after 2 years that are out of best practice. So our behaviours are improving. The number of times we're not complying with best practice is decreasing, and lo and behold, so are the numbers of mealybug. So some really good results there. That's why I started with the one we didn't get the good results in. Vaughn, did you want to talk? This is one of Vaughn's pet blocks, so I'll let Vaughn talk about this one.
Yeah, I love this. You've listened to 2 old baby boomers here, like we're nozzle heads telling you spray, 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 and you'll resolve everything. This is an example of a vineyard, and there was actually at least one other block in our study, and I suspect there are many more out there where, in fact, they probably don't need to be applying insecticides at all. And 1C is a block that I know well. You can see there that the number of mealybug found in each of those 3 years for which we collected data, they were all in the low category. So we had a manager who was just not quite ready to give up on putting his 1 immediate pre-flowering buprofizin on, despite the results suggesting that actually in this Merlot block, he really could probably do that. I know this block well because I'd looked at it for close to 10 years. There's no leaf roll virus in here. At these numbers of mealybug, sooty mould is never going to be an issue. If there's no leaf roll virus, mealybug can't acquire the leaf roll virus. They therefore can't transmit it. So in this case, this grower could potentially, if they wanted to, say, maybe I forego buprofizin every year and maybe I put it on in alternating years, just as a measure. So this is where we would like people to get to, but where you've got some of those 3C, 12C problems, then you really do need to be looking to up the ante and apply your insecticides potentially at that 2+1. We're aware of growers out there who are doing 2+2. 2 buprofizins followed by 2 spirotetramats. If needs must, yes, definitely. But our thinking is that you should not need to be applying those high input programs for really longer than several years. If your mealybug population will build slowly, generally, over time. Similarly, the reduction in mealybug numbers will happen over a period of 2 or 3 vintages. So, yes, you do need to keep your foot on the throat of this problem for several years. But if in the case of like 3C, you're not seeing changes to your mealybug populations over time, then really that should be a catalyst for a conversation among the team as to what is going wrong. Is it something to do with our sprayer setup? Is it something to do with the way in which we're applying these products? Because if your mealybug numbers are remaining relatively constant and high, then doing more of the same is going to give you the same kind of outcome. So something needs to change there. But this is a really nice story, this 1C. That previous block there, if you notice 11C, they're putting on 3 spray programs, but look where their mealybug populations had got to in 2021 and 2010, and 3 mealybug per 100 leaves respectively. and yet they were putting on 2 buprofizins and a spirotetramat. So in that case, they too could probably be pulling that back to potentially those 2 pre-flowering buprofizin, or maybe even doing what 1C might be contemplating doing, going to that every alternating year, bearing in mind monitoring for virus and monitoring for mealybugs. So concluding remarks, vigilance around the water volumes, the timing, the chemical rates relative to the size of the target, the canopy size at the time of application, and of course the vine planting density and all of the variability that is so common in our vineyards today. We haven't gone into this in a lot of detail. Both Andrew and I have touched on it, but the sprayer setup, sprayer maintenance, sounds really simple, but when we were doing this, there were definitely a lot of issues there around those, the condition of filters, nozzle alignment, the choice of nozzles, the speed at which those tractors were going down the rows. These are all really important things. Coverage and wetting is really important for mealybugs. They do not, unlike grass grub, they do not all emerge at a particular point in the season. I have a colleague argues that they're probably emerging over a period of about 90 days. You know, whether it's 30 days, 60 days or 90 days, they're emerging over a prolonged period of time, which is why we need to be targeting them as late as we possibly can, given the PHIs or the withholding periods for these different products. And the last thing I would say, you know, I think for years I've stood up here and I've said to people that they need to be monitoring for mealybugs, you know, collecting leaves, collecting bunches, having a look at them. That still holds, but it's a really unattractive proposition. Late season, when you're getting ready for harvest, it's what we do, so we make the time to do it, but I appreciate for a lot of you people, it's really not practical to be doing that. So there is now commercialised products out there, a mealybug synthetic sex pheromone to help with that monitoring. It's a passive system, but you know, you've got to do what works for you, but you really cannot manage effectively that which is not adequately monitored. So monitoring, as it is for any pest or any disease, is really, really important. And finally, thank you to BRI for funding this project. We really enjoyed this. We got a lot out of it. We hope the growers concerned got a lot out of it. We think they did. We think in many cases their results reflected that interaction. And what is, I guess, one of the weaknesses of a study like this is we can't have a true control. We can't go to a grower at the start of a project and say, would you mind not spraying for mealybugs for 3 years? We just can't do that. So we don't have that. We don't have that ability. But I think despite that less than good scientific rigour, if you like, we've still got some really informative information here that we hope is of value to you. And we'd like to thank those growers. We were a pain in their backside a lot of the time, sort of pestering them for this, that and the other. But yeah, we really appreciate it. Oh yeah, got a minute 30, okay. There were also 4 organic vineyards in this study here. And we didn't present those because of course they're not part of an insecticide best practice project. But 2 of those vineyards had really good mealybug results over the course of this study. So clearly, in the absence of insecticides, something else is going on, and that something else is biological control. So I think we underestimate that at our peril. You know, there were 2 other organic vineyards that did see some troubles with their mealybugs. So why that was happening, we don't really know. So yeah, this is a pretty dynamic situation. Mealybugs are an insidious little insect. I've been working on this for 20 years now. There have been people working on it a lot longer than I have. It's just a problem that just keeps giving, and you know, there's no single solution to it. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.